You know, we've been in a series called The Runaway, and it ends today. And it ends in a very unusual way, to be quite honest. There's a distinction this book has, unlike any other of the 66 total books of the Bible. And I'll tell you what that distinction is. Not that it's named Jonah, that would be a distinction. But there's something about it that no other book in the Bible has. And so the story, for those of you that might not have been able to join us, is basically a story of a prophet who was told to go to Nineveh. He was a prophet in the northern kingdom to Israel. But Jonah, the prophet, didn't really want to go to Nineveh. Nineveh was the capital of the Assyrians. The Assyrians were bad people. They didn't believe in God. The only thing they ever heard of God. They worshiped pagan gods, and they were really cruel people. They were very brutal. And so instead of going to Nineveh, he got on a ship and went to the Spanish Riviera. I mean, literally headed to Spain. Tarshish is what the scripture calls it, to get away from God. Well, God, you can't run from him. Everywhere you run into him. So guess what? Ran into a storm at sea. And the sailors on the ship knew something was going on. They were not worshipers of Yahweh at the moment, so they were trying to figure out who is this that's caused the gods to be so angry at us. And they cast lots, and they fell on Jonah. And Jonah admitted, I'm the one. I'm running from the one true God, the one who made the heavens and the earth. And he says, throw me over, and it'll be okay. You'll be okay. So they threw him overboard. And you would think that's the end of the story, but it's not, because God ordained that a fish, a whale perhaps, swallowed him up. And so the whale swallowed him up, and Jonah spent 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a whale, until he is thrown up on the beach. And now he goes to Nineveh, and he preaches, and he tells them that God sees their wickedness. And if they don't stop it, God is going to bring judgment. Well, guess what? Immediately they responded. Every one of them. From the greatest, that means the king, all the way down to even the animals. And so God relented of what he was going to do. He withheld judgment on Nineveh. Now that's the end of chapter 3. Wouldn't that be a nice place to put a bow on the story? I mean, wouldn't that be the perfect place to end the book? It ends great, awesome, Nineveh, they did well. God blessed them, and Jonah, he did what he was supposed to. Doesn't end chapter 3. There's a chapter 4. I've often wondered, why did you write chapter 4, God? And I believe with all my heart the answer is this. Because God has a message for us. You see, chapters 1, 2, 3 are about God working through Jonah. Chapter 4 is about God working in Jonah. It's one thing for God to use you and work through you, but what he wants to do is work in you. Because when he works in you, then you are at your best as he works through you. And so chapter 4 is about what he wants to work in Jonah. So I want you to write this down, because this is the heart and soul of chapter 4. Here's the statement. Jonah knew the heart of God. He just didn't have the heart of God. Jonah knew the heart of God. He just didn't have the heart of God. And see, far more than God brought you here today to hear facts and figures and dates and stories, he brought you here to change you, for us to be transformed. Our goal at First Baptist Orlando is not information, it's transformation. What good does it do us if we understand all this and we know about God, but we don't live like it? So chapter 4 is about having the heart of God. And it's a painful story, because the first thing you see, the opening words of the book in chapter 4 are so sad. Here are the opening words. Now Nineveh's just repented. 120,000 Assyrians who were absolutely terrible people, and now they are honoring God. So that ought to be something that you celebrate, right? Look at chapter 4, verse 1. But it displeased Jonah exceedingly, and he was angry. And he prayed to the Lord, "Oh Lord, is not this what I said when I was in my country?" In other words, Lord, I know you. That's why I made haste to go to Tarshish, because I knew you're a gracious God, merciful, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love, relenting from disaster. Let me ask you a question. Was Jonah's theology right? Did he really understand God's heart? Yep. Every one of those words, he's dead on. He knew God's heart. He just didn't have God's heart. And so what does he say after that? He says, therefore now, O Lord, please take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live. You got to be kidding me. This guy wants to die. He wanted to die when he told him to throw him overboard. He now tells the Lord he wants to die, and he's not through yet. He's going to wish to die one more time. What is wrong with him? He understood the heart of God. He just didn't have it. And he was mad. And he was angry. Now, what's crazy about this, he just wrote one of the most incredible Psalms in chapter 2. Remember, from the belly of the well. He wrote these beautiful words about, I will sacrifice to you with thanksgiving, and salvation belongs to the Lord. I remember the Lord. I mean, he writes this incredible psalm. And now he's angry with God and he wants to die. How does that happen? Same way it happens in our life. We're driving down the road, listening to worship music, man, singing along, just praising God. Somebody in front of us stops unknown, I mean, just for no reason, and all of a sudden that praise song goes out the window. And we're like all over whoever it was, and the same thing happens on Sunday. We come in here, we're worshiping, we're having a wonderful time, and then we walk outside and we go right back to being Jonah. So we can't be too hard on him. And one moment he's praising God, one moment he's praising the Lord, and the next moment he's mad at him and saying, God, I want to die. But that's just like life. And you know what? Don't give up. Because in those little rides and cycles of our life, God's doing something. God's not through. He's working on you just like he's working on Jonah. So basically what God tells him is, Jonah, it's a question. Do you do well to be angry? Verse 4. Jonah, do you feel like it's okay for you to be angry? So let's apply it to our life. Is there a group of people that have frustrated you and you don't like them? And is it okay for you to feel that way? You see, what God is doing is just asking Jonah to take a look at himself. Jonah, is that okay with you? You think you ought to feel this way about these people? And by the way, everybody has Ninevites in their life. You realize that. And I'm not talking about Assyrians. I'm talking about Ninevites, people that are not like you, people that are maybe of a different color than you, people that come from different backgrounds, people that maybe come from another country, people that have different views, people that are living lifestyles that you don't approve of. Things like that. Everybody has people they struggle with. It could be a neighbor. It could be somebody in your family that they're just a jerk and you struggle with them. They're a Ninevite. So the next time you send a text, just say, hey, glad to have a visit with you, Ninevite. No, don't say that. Just think that. Everybody has Ninevites. So is it okay for us to be angry that God's not going to get them? Is it okay for us to be angry against them? That's what God asks. Now, the next thing I want you to remember, to have the heart of God, you have to care for those he cares for. To have the heart of God, you have to care for those he cares for. Not some of them, all of them. I mean, I hear people all the time say, oh, yeah, I love everybody, and I love... No, you don't. You just say that. I just say that. We really don't. You and I are very prone to love people that are in a circle of ours, or love those that are like us, or those that, you know, we can get along with or whatever. But to have the heart of God means you care for those he cares for. God cared for the Assyrians. Jonah cared for Jonah. Jonah cared for Jonah. It's as obvious as can be. And so God does something really cool. He lets him live in a parable. He puts him in a place, and he actually has a parable that Jonah's in. It's the coolest thing when God does that, because it helps us to learn a lesson, because we see it happening around us. Watch this. Start with me in verse 5. Jonah went out of the city, sat on the east of the city, made a booth for himself. He sat under it in the shade till he should see what would become of the city. In other words, he was waiting on God to bring fire. He was just waiting on them to, not be true in their repentance, and God's going to get them. So he's watching. And then this happens. Now the Lord appointed a plant and made it come up over Jonah, that it might be a shade over his head, to save him from his discomfort. So Jonah was exceedingly glad because of the plant. You need to underline that. He was exceedingly glad, not that Nineveh repented, but that a plant grew up. Hang on to that thought. But when the dawn came the next day, God appointed a worm that attacked the plant, and it withered. You realize everything in the book of Jonah, every living being in the book of Jonah obeys God except one, Jonah. Everything, a worm, a plant, a wind, everything in this book obeys. So when the sun rose, God appointed a scorching east wind. The sun beat down on the head of Jonah so that he was faint. And he asked that he might die. Here we go again, second verse, same song. It is better for me to die than to live. You know what? God could have taken him. God could have got him just like that. You know what I believe about you? The reason you're still here is because God wants you here. God can take you anytime he wants. And he can make another one look just like you. God can do anything, right? But there's a reason you're here. He wasn't through with Jonah. He has this incredible grace and mercy to put up with us. And so watch what he does. He's not through with him. But God said to Jonah, do you do well to be angry for the plant? And he said, yes, I do well to be angry. Angry enough to die. So what is God doing? He's showing Jonah that everything in Jonah's life is about Jonah. Why did Jonah rejoice over a plant? Was he a horticulturist? Was he had a garden? What was he? Why did he rejoice? You know the answer. Because it gave him shade. So he rejoiced over anything that helped him. He loved anybody that loved him. And so here is the classic example of somebody who is exceedingly glad because the plant gives him shade, and then he's really upset and angry when the plant dies. You know what I've always believed? You can tell a lot about somebody by what they rejoice in and by what makes them cry. Almost every interview I've ever done with somebody, just trying to get to know them, I'll ask them two questions. What makes you happy? What makes you rejoice? And then I ask, what makes you cry? I've heard some crazy answers to those. But you know what I think it tells you about your heart? It just tells me what it is that you're looking for in life. For Jonah, it was his comfort. For Jonah, anything that helped him, he loved it. But anything that made him uncomfortable, he hated it. And so God is actually showing him, Jonah, it's really all about you, isn't it? How many times has it been all about us? My first church, it was a little church in West Arkansas. I was up in the mountains, and I was 19 years old. I didn't know better. I wasn't going to be a preacher. I was not going to be a pastor. I just said, I'll do whatever. And a guy called me and said, you want to go preach at this church? They're looking for a married guy, but they need somebody to fill in. I wasn't married at the time. I said, yeah, I'll be glad to. So I went. They asked me to come back. I went back. They asked me to come back. I went back, and they said, we're going to vote on you. And there were 21 people in that church, and they voted me in as their pastor. What I didn't know, of the 21, 10 hated the other 11. It was a mess. It was a train wreck. But I thought, man, this is wonderful. I'm in this church, and this is awesome. And then one of the leaders, a godly woman named Miss Cummings, she comes up to me and she says, I got a question for you, David. What's that? If somebody on their deathbed prays and invites Jesus to come into their life, do they go to heaven? I'm young, and I'm like, oh, this is a trap. And I'm trying to think, what would Jesus say? Because he always had an awesome answer for every trap. And I looked at her, and I said, yes, they will. And she goes, I'll show you what she did. She turned her back on me. She turned around and she went, oh, I can't believe that you believe that. You mean somebody that waits till the end of their life to give their life to Jesus is going to get to go the same heaven that I'm going to, and I've served him all my life, and I've labored for him and done all these things for him. And I looked at her. The first thing that went through my mind was, I'm not sure you're going. But I didn't say it, okay? It did not come out of my mouth. I looked at her and I said, well, Miss Cummings, you act like you regret your life. You act like you regret all those things you did for the Lord. Because it ought to be your rejoicing that you got to serve him a long time. And she said, well, I just don't see it that way. And that was my first introduction to church. And basically what it says is this: sometimes we only care about things that bless us. We don't care about people that don't. We don't care about things that don't. I've been in services where God moved and there was incredible things happening, people giving their life to Christ. And back in the day when I stood out in the foyer, we called it, and greeted people when they left. And all I heard about after those services, not how many people gave their life to Christ. It was too hot today. It was too cold today. The music was too loud today. The music wasn't loud enough today. I mean, I've even had people walk up and say, you know, I really don't like that tie you have on today. So you know what I've learned about church? It's really a lot about us, isn't it? And to hell with the world that may not even know Jesus. As long as I'm comfortable, as long as you sing my favorite songs, as long as, you know, you do everything I want you to do, man, it's all fun and games. And so God let Jonah see that. And I don't mind confessing, I've been there too. I struggle with that. Back in days of seminary, one of the things that I loved to do in seminary was run, because it kind of helped me to get the pressure off from the school. And man, I was running a lot, and I was kind of training for a half marathon. I just run 10 miles, averaging like 8 minutes a mile, and I was so proud of myself. And I was getting ready, so I entered this race. It was a 4-mile race. It was called the Stockyard Stampede. It was in Fort Worth, and it literally was a race down in the old cow town, they call it, of Fort Worth. There was a hill that went forever in that race. And I remember as I started up that hill, I was dying. Oh my goodness, I was struggling. And then I hear 2 guys coming up behind me. And they're talking about last night, what they did last night. They were at the same party. And one of them said, oh my goodness, I was so drunk last night. Said, I haven't been to bed yet. And the other one said, man, me too. I was drunk. I was stoned. He said, did you get any of the marijuana? Did you get any of the weed that was there? He said, man, it was wonderful. And they're talking about this horrible party that they were both involved with, and they're passing me. I just looked up and said, Lord, get them before they get to the top of the hill. That's not fair. That's not fair. God, I have served you. I mean, I've done everything to try to take care of my body and to honor you, and you're going to let 2 pagans pass me. And I'm telling you, I can remember it like it was yesterday. The Lord said, you don't even care for them, do you? You're more worried about your life, your race, than you are about their life. So we're all guilty of this. And that's why chapter 4 exists, is to show us that God wants not just to work through us, but he wants to work in us. And he wants to give us his heart, to see what he sees. Jonah had withheld grace from a people he didn't like. He was so consumed with what Jonah wanted. And today the church follows the path of Jonah. And listen to this quote. It's one of the best quotes I've read in a long time. John Allen Turner. He says, it's hard to convince people that a God they can't see loves them. when a church they can see doesn't seem to like them. That is a strong quote. And I can tell you, I've seen it in my own life. I came that close walking away from the church because of racism, bigotry, prejudice. And I kept hearing about this God who supposedly loves everybody, but all I saw at church was you had to be a certain color, you had to be this or you had to be that to be able to get in. I can't reconcile. And you know what? The world can't either. And the world has gone tone deaf to our message of love when they don't see it when they walk in the door. And I just think, we applaud what God wants, not what we see. So Jonah didn't have the heart of God to see the Assyrians, to love them, and to rejoice over the fact that they had come to repentance. Now here's the last part of this story. Go back to the text. He said, Are you really thinking it's okay to be upset over a plant? Verse 10. You pity a plant for which you didn't labor. You didn't make it grow. It just came into being in one night and perished the next night. And should I not pity Nineveh? That great city in which there are more than 120,000 people who don't know their right hand from their left, and also much cattle. In other words, okay, so Jonah, you're all upset over a plant. Shouldn't I be concerned about 120,000 people that don't know their right hand from their left? What does that mean? That is a Hebrew expression. You'll see it a lot in the Old Testament. It basically means they have no knowledge of God. They have no understanding of God. So you know what I take this last part to mean? We know better. We have experienced the love of God. We know better than to be more concerned over a plant than we are people. But they didn't know better. So here is God with passion for people who don't even know him. The Assyrians probably had never even heard his name. And yet Jonah's all worked up over a plant because it's about Jonah. So for us, the question we've got to face is, we know better. And because he's loved us, shouldn't we love them? Shouldn't we care for others since we have been given so much grace and so much love and he has poured out for us? You know what makes this book different than any other book? There are 66 books in the Bible. In the ESV, now versions will vary, okay? The ESV, I love the version because I think it's very accurate, but it's not a wooden word-for-word translation that makes it difficult to understand the Bible. But here's what's interesting about the book of Jonah. It's the only book of 66 books in the Bible that ends with a question. The only one to end with a question. And the question is, should I not pity Nineveh? Who's the Ninevite in your life? Who are the people that a minute ago when I started talking, you thought of them just like that? Should God not pity them? Does he care for them? Yes. Does he care for those that hurt us, stand against us, whatever? Yeah, he does. And you know what's interesting about the question that's not answered? Why didn't God answer it? Why isn't there an ending to this book? Why don't we get this message that Jonah repented, had now the full heart of God, and started the First Baptist Church of Nineveh or something? We don't have anything. It just ends. Because the question that I pose is, did Jonah ever get it? Did he ever really get it and understand what it means to have the heart of God? I don't know the answer. But I think a question that's a lot more important today is, do you get it? Will I get it? Do I get it? Now I'm going to get real personal here. In 1980, Rachel and I had moved to Fort Worth, and I was in seminary. And so 1980 was, I'd heard of gay rights, but I really didn't. I didn't know any people that were same-sex attracted. I didn't know any gay people. I just didn't know. So we went to a mall in Fort Worth, Texas, on the west side, Ridgemar Mall. And it's by Carswell Air Force Base, if any of you know where that is. And we always look forward to going Friday night to the mall. We'd go and eat somewhere, maybe just walk around. We never could buy anything. We had any money, but we'd just like to walk around and talk. And we got to the mall, and I said, hey, I'm going to run in the restroom, and give me a minute, I'll be right back. When I went in the restroom, I got propositioned by this guy, and he did a very ungodly thing. And the moment he did it, everything in me wanted to beat the fool out of him. Literally, I'm telling you, rage filled me. And I just finally got enough control. I walked out of the door. I said, Rachel, let's go. And she said, we just got here. I don't care, let's go. And so I got in the car and I said, I want to tell you what happened to me. Now, I know that as you hear that story, you think the most concerning part was what he did to me. No. I was far worse a sinner in that moment. I've never felt anger like that. I've never felt rage like that. And so I just began to ask God to remove it. I said, God, there is no way I can be a pastor. There's no way I represent you when I can have anger and rage towards somebody like that. That's not who you are. And that didn't come from you. So God, whatever it takes, I prayed it that night, whatever it takes, take this anger away from me. The next day, I get a call from a family. Rachel and I were great friends with them. We used to vacation with them. In fact, we would stay in their home a lot. When they were there, they had a nice swimming pool. And in Texas, that meant a lot. And so their son, we'd watched him grow up, hung out with him. He called me and said, hey, you got a minute? Sure. He came into the office. I thought he was going to talk about college choices. He was a senior, and he was trying to make decisions on college. He sat down. The first thing out of his mouth, he looked at me and said, I'm gay. And I just knew you would understand. I just wanted to tell you because I know how much you love me and how much you love my family. The moment he said, I'm gay, I knew God was answering my prayer. The next day, I know you're not going to believe it. It's just one of these stories you're like, no, there's no way that could be. I promise you. The next day, a young lady in our church, that same church, she was a point guard for the high school basketball team. She was really gifted as a basketball player. In fact, she had potential to go to D1 school and really do well. She called me and said, can I come by? I need to talk to you about something. I said, sure, come on by. Again, I think college. She comes in and sits down. The first thing out of her mouth, David, I just need to tell you something. I'm gay. And as soon as she said it, the Lord said, I'm answering your prayer. I walked with those kids. I loved those kids. We moved to another church. That church, the chairman of deacons, was one of my closest friends. We ran together every morning. One morning he didn't show up, and he's a businessman. I thought he had something going on. You know, he couldn't be there. His wife called that afternoon and said, have you seen him? Nope. Well, I don't know where he is, and if you see him or hear from him, let me know. So I started trying to call him. He finally answered the phone. I knew there was something wrong. I said, what's going on? Where are you? He said, I'm out in the woods in a little cabin. I just need you to talk to me. And I said, well, sure, what's going on? He said, I'm gay. Let me tell you, that guy was one of my closest friends. Still a great friend today. I walked with him. I said, I'll be there for you. We'll get through this, and I'm going to help you. I'm going to do everything I know to do. I remember the church after that. It's like God was lining it up. A family comes to me and said, David, pray for our son. He has AIDS, and he's close to death. And they said, no, we don't want you to go see him because he's got AIDS. And I said, why not? Well, we just don't want you to have to do that because we know the stigma and all. There's not a stigma. Where is he? And they told me what hospital and where he was, and I went to see him. And I walked in the room, he's skin and bones. And he looked up in shock. He said, Pastor David, what are you doing here? I'm here to just be here with you. And so I talked to him about his faith, and I said, are you sure that moment, when that moment comes, whenever it is, you're ready to stand before him? I talked about how to give your life to Christ, and I prayed with him again just to make sure. And it came time for me to leave, and I looked at him, I said, hey, can I hug you? And he said, David, I got AIDS. You're not supposed to touch me. I said, and ask about that. I just want to know if it's okay for you. Well, yeah, sure, but why? Why would you want to hug me? And this is what I told him. Because it's what Jesus did for me. He hugged me. And I wasn't clean. If Jesus loved me, he loved me so I can love you. And I remember picking his body up. He was just light as a feather because he was not long. About a week later, he died. And I just held him. And he wept, and I wept. And the reason I did that, I know better. I don't withhold grace. I don't withhold love. Why? Because God didn't withhold love from me. He gave me grace. So should we not pity those? Yes, we should. Should we not love those? Yes, whoever they are. So now you know a little what drives me. Anybody that walks in this door, they will be loved. And we're not going to be that church that talks about the love of God, but never lives the love of God when people come. We're here for that reason. We're not a Jonah who's going to be more worked up over a plant than we are people. You know what? Jesus cares for us. You know how much he loves you? You know how much he cares for you? And he cares for those around you. And the reason he loves us and cares for us is so we can care for them. Rachel and I were sitting the other night at home and, no football game to watch. And, it was kind of boring. And I was flipping channels. And I saw this, just said something about praise something. And I thought, that'd be cool. Maybe it's Hillsong or, Bethel or somebody. And I clicked on it, and it was the Gaither videos. Bill Gaither, man, a guy who changed literally worship and Christian music just with his influence. And he does the thing where he brings artists. Jody McBrayer from Avalon, I saw him. I saw others we've had here. And he gets them all in a room, and they just sing. And when we turned on the program, it was at a point Bill Gaither said, Jesus cares. There's an old hymn we're going to sing. And he looked down at a guy and said, hey, do you believe Jesus cares? And the guy said, yes, I do. And he said, well, sing about it. And that guy would sing a verse. Russ Taff, who used to be with the Imperials. Russ Taff has been through alcoholism. He's been literally abused in his own home. Parents both gone now. He looked at Russ, said, Russ, you believe Jesus cares? Sing about it. And then he came to a guy named Jim Murray. Jim Murray used to be the lead singer for the Imperials. He's just lost his wife recently. And he said, Jim, I know it's been lonely. I know those nights have been terrible. But do you believe Jesus cares? Jim said, yes. He said, well, then sing about it. And Jim tried to sing, and he began to weep. And I'm sitting there on the couch crying. Rachel's sitting there crying. And it just overwhelmed me that Jesus cares for me. No matter what I'm going through, no matter what I'm walking through, Jesus cares. And he cares for them. And he cares for me so that I can care for others. So today, I just don't want you to know about the heart of God. I want you to have the heart